Hey, this is Chance Dorland, and you can come meet me, Robert Koehler, Colin Marshall, and Travis Hull on Saturday, June 18th from 4 to 6 p.m. at the Seoul Global Cultural Center in Myeongdong. We're having a live podcast event hosted by the Seoul Book and Culture Club. So we're going to talk about some of the things we talk about on the podcast that we do here for Korea FM. We're also going to take questions and comments from the audience. So we'd love to see you on Saturday, June 18th from 4 to 6 p.m. And you can find more information on facebook.com/Korea FM or visit us at koreafm.net. I'm Chance Dorland, and welcome to the Marmot's Hole podcast, brought to you by KoreaFM.net, an online radio station featuring independent musicians and original podcast content from the Korean Peninsula. I'm, of course, joined here each episode by Robert Koehler, a magazine editor here in Seoul, who for years operated the Marmot's Hole blog on rjkoehler.com. And Rob, it's been quite a while since we last spoke. Now the weather's a lot nicer than it was before, so I'm sure you must be out and about doing some of your landscape photography. And tonight, in fact, you were taking some photos.
Yeah, tonight was okay, but unfortunately, for the last couple of weeks, the air quality, not just in Seoul, but throughout the country, has been less than desirable.
Yeah, it seems like it's definitely getting worse. I've been here this summer will be my 3-year anniversary of living here in the Seoul area, and it seems not just like I'm noticing it more than I did before. It seems like it's really bad, and it's getting worse. So that's what we're discussing on today's episode. And I just want to go through, like I always do, a quick couple of articles talking about this, because not only is it getting worse in my mind, but it's getting reported a lot more than I think it has in the past. So just yesterday, in fact, The Diplomat came out with an article titled, "Who is to Blame for Northeast Asia's Transboundary Air Pollution Problem? Simply pointing the finger at China won't relieve the smog impacting Korea," where it explains that basically South Korea, my wording, gets effed all year round, as in the winter, the ROK gets air pollution from excessive amounts of coal being used in China for heat, and then in the spring, they get yellow dust from the deserts of northern China and Mongolia that's blown across Northeast Asia. It picks up soot, carcinogens from China-based industrial processes along the way. Then it comes here to South Korea. So as a result, those of us living here in Seoul, in Busan, other parts of the country, as you mentioned, it's kind of happening all over. We have an increased likelihood of health problems and really shitty, smoggy days where I'm sure taking some landscape photography photos will be difficult.
Yeah, it's definitely harshed my photographic buzz, so to speak. A little bit of pollution for landscape photography is not necessarily a bad thing. It does make for very colorful sunrises and sunsets. But what we've seen in Seoul in particular, but really throughout the country, has been it's a pretty bad sight. Visibility has been nil. The air quality has been poor. How poor, I guess, we'll be going into later in this discussion. And as you pointed out, and again, we'll probably be going deeper into this as this podcast continues, who and what is to blame is not an easy thing to determine. Now, some of it, for example, the yellow dust, that's been something that's been happening in this region for quite a long time. I recall reading today that there are records about the yellow dust going back all the way into the medieval period here in Korea. So, that's something that I think we generally have a good idea about what's happening there. But the other factors, for example, a lot of the other particulate matter in the air, that's something that is a matter of controversy as to where that's coming from and what to do about it.
Yeah, and I'll explain some of these terms a little bit later as I go through a couple more articles. I mean, obviously, yellow dust, that's coming, as I just mentioned, from the deserts, and you said that goes back far into history. They've been recording that. But then there's also something called PM 2.5, which is a scientific term. We'll discuss that. And I don't know. I think I disagree with you pretty heavily, Rob. I think it is pretty easy to tell where a lot of this is coming from, and there's some facts to back that up. But before we get into all that, you mentioned that actually with photography, some of this air pollution, it makes sunsets and sunrises a little bit more colorful. I'm not a photo guy. That's the case?
Yeah, that's. I mean, I don't really want to get into the reasons why, but yeah, it does add a bit of. It reddens up the sunrise and the sunset. Some of your most spectacular sunrises and sunsets are, not necessarily due to natural causes. But I mean, there's a fine line to this. I mean, if you got so much pollution in the air that you're getting visibility of something like less than 10 kilometers, then you're pretty much fucked.
Yeah, but it hasn't gotten to the point of like in Beijing, they have those photos where there's like a giant jumbotron that shows a picture of the sun, because people can't see the sky. It hasn't quite gotten to that level, though. There have been some days here in Korea where it's been pretty bad. It looked like there's like a fire in the distance or something.
Oh yeah, no, I mean some of the photos that you do see in the news are quite dystopian, where they look like one of those old one of those science fiction films where everything's polluted, and it's not quite as bad as some of the sites you see in Beijing or Shanghai, but it's nothing to be proud of either.
To mention Beijing and Shanghai, while it might not look as bad, I've been checking the air quality the last month every once in a while because it's been pretty bad. And we've actually beat Shanghai and Beijing on quite a lot of days. So it's not just what you can see. It's also what's, in the air, and then you have to measure that. And we'll get into that here. So
yeah, and it doesn't help that Seoul's in a basin too. So
yeah, and I do, I'm going to throw Korea a bone here. I'm going to say, obviously they do get some things that they can't really change, some things that they can't help. We just mentioned yellow dust, but I'm going to get to it now. Korea's a little bit full of itself here, and there needs to be a lot more blame inward than outward. This Diplomat article that I mentioned, it goes on to say that the Korean media cover the problem inconsistently, and during the winter, the coverage highlights the Chinese influence, and in spring, basically they always talk about yellow dust, and it focuses on health-related impacts and preventative measures like using a dust mask and air purifiers, etc. But the Diplomat says that both of these approaches fall short of getting people to a point where they're actually going to talk about the problem and do something that's useful and is going to solve it. And a lot of the reporting is factually inconsistent. So that's that first Diplomat article. Something else that I wanted to bring up here, in addition to a third article, a reporter pal of mine, I've been meeting a lot at some events, and I just actually took a tour with him by the name of Donald Kirk, a really well-known reporter, journalist here in South Korea. He recently wrote for Forbes, and he's covering a story that other people are covering as well, but his write-up was particularly good. And he was talking about how NASA is now involved in all of this as they're trying to figure out who's to blame for this air pollution in South Korea. And he writes that Koreans, yes, they often accuse the Chinese, but in a highly industrialized society like Korea, he makes the point that it's difficult to know who exactly is doing what. So a team of scientists sponsored by NASA and Korea's National Institute of Environmental Research are currently engaged in a 6-week project trying to get those answers by using a vintage DC-8 aircraft on almost daily flights that will continue until mid-June, so about another 2 weeks from now. And they'll be doing this actually again later this year as well. And they're just doing these flights almost every day, or they're going up and they're testing the air. And this is funny because, Don, who's my friend on Facebook, and some other journalists who are my friends on Facebook, a lot of people have been doing this kind of like ride-along, and then they post all these funny photos on Facebook. But as I've been seeing these photos of them in this giant NASA aircraft, going around the peninsula trying to figure out what's in the air and is it from China or is it from South Korea, it's made me a little angry. It's gotten me a little bit pissed off because to what I said earlier where I disagree with you, we already know that the majority of this pollution is from Korea. It's not from China. Actually, back in November of last year, I interviewed a member of Greenpeace who's located here in Seoul. He's Korean. And he talked about the organization's joint study with Harvard that actually was released back, I believe, in March of 2015, so even further in the past, that said 50% or more, basically 50 to 70% of PM 2.5 air pollution here in South Korea, which is an ultrafine dust. It's known to cause health problems such as heart disease, strokes, and lung cancer. It kills an estimated 1,600 people in Korea each year. The vast majority of this, 50 to 70%, comes from Korean coal power plants, not China. Last year in a press conference here in Seoul, Greenpeace said that, quote, despite what is widely reported through the Korean media, once again, 50 to 70% of this particle-laden smog, what they call PM 2.5, is generated here in the ROK. And that press conference was in addition to a 4-day campaign against South Korea's expansion of coal power plants that to this day is still going forward. Something like a dozen more coal power plants are going to be built in South Korea by 2021 as part of a 14-year energy plan launched back in 2013. So, I mean, I know this is just one study, and there's always different studies and things like that, but I'm pretty sure when NASA finishes what they're doing, they're going to say the same thing. We've known this for a long time. I've done street interviews here in South Korea where I've spoke with expats and also Koreans, and every once in a while I find someone who knows what they're talking about. But for the most part, when I ask people, where does this air pollution come from, they always say it's China and it's yellow dust. And like I said, every once in a while, I run into someone who's actually, oh, no, Korea has a lot of coal power plants. People know this. Maybe people aren't reporting this enough, and that's the reason why. But this is not a mystery. We know where this is coming from, and I'm getting pretty upset about it. I mean, it really sucks now.
Well, I mean, as you pointed out, the Greenpeace study reported that something between 50 to 70% of your particulate pollution is from local sources. But that is just one study. I mean, the Ministry of Environment here has their own has done their own studies on that. Seoul Metropolitan Government has done its own studies on that. I mean, for example, in April, Seoul Metropolitan Government did a study, and they said that 59% of the dust was coming from China and Mongolia. Well, 20% were from the city itself, and the rest came from surrounding areas, for example, like Incheon and Gyeonggi Province. So where exactly that dust is coming from, we don't know, and that's one of the reasons why NASA and not just NASA, but a whole bunch of U.S. researchers have been brought in to work with the Koreans to try to figure out what's going on. You brought up the joint U.S.-Korean study that's going on. They got like 580 researchers from 72 institutions working on this thing, including, as you mentioned, the big DC-8. No doubt we'll have a better understanding of what's coming from where when that study comes out. I don't want to make any predictions. I know you seem pretty confident it's going to say that most of it comes from Korean stuff.
But I mean, Rob, this isn't like one of those studies where it's like, ooh, drinking red wine's actually good for your heart, or like, ooh, chocolate's good for your skin. I saw that just on my Facebook feed. These stupid studies, they come out all the time. Do you really think that what they're doing with NASA is going to fly in the face of this Greenpeace Harvard study? I don't think so.
Well, it could. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's not like, granted, the Ministry of Environment and Seoul Metropolitan Government may have its own agenda there, but so does Greenpeace. I mean, it's not like Greenpeace is a neutral organization.
But Greenpeace's agenda is not to badmouth South Korea and not blame China. I mean, that's not an easily identifiable agenda with Greenpeace. I mean, they want everyone to clean up their act.
No, but it does have an agenda vis-a-vis Korean energy policy.
Because Korea's getting worse. China is actually pulling it back a little bit.
It very well may be. I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm just saying that, we'll know more about the specifics here when NASA is done with its research. And hey, you might be right. I'm just not necessarily sure that they are. Regardless,
you may be right, Chance. I'm not saying you're wrong. This is like that. What's that thing that Donald Trump does? That he's just like, I'm not saying that. This guy. Or, what did he say recently? He's like, I'm not saying that the Clintons murdered someone, but I'm just saying we need to look at that guy that committed suicide. Maybe he was murdered.
Well, maybe, but I mean, aside from the Greenpeace study, what other studies have come up with those type of numbers? I mean, Seoul Metropolitan Government's done a study.
You bring up a good point, Rob. I am a little bit upset about this. I'm going to pull it back. But my point is that if you look at, okay, so for instance, you work in publishing. I'm more on the reporting end of things, although there's obviously some bleed through there. What's something that is very common in media and public press here in South Korea? What's something that you see all the time that would affect something like this? Is it that they're very open about things that are not going so well? Is it that they're trying to protect the information so that it doesn't make Korea look bad? Where do they usually fall on that spectrum?
Well, I don't really care to speculate on that. I mean, just to give you an example, I mean, while the Ministry of Environment, may have a very, because it's working with the Park administration, may have a certain point of view. Seoul Metropolitan Government, on the other hand, is run by the opposition. I'm pretty sure they'd be more than happy to come out with a study that, contradicts what the central government says. I mean, for that matter, even within the Ministry of Environment, I mean, one of the problems with trying to not just come up with solutions to this, but also to get accurate predictions, which again we'll probably be discussing a little bit later, because that's another major issue and one that affects me professionally and personally. Is that even within the Ministry of Environment, you have different, they're coming out with different statements about causes all the time. So, and they themselves are being inconsistent, let alone what other ministries in the government are saying.
Yeah, that's something that you see in a lot of different areas, the fact that the ministries often are not communicating with each other.
Yeah, the ministries aren't communicating with each other, and even within individual ministries, the left hand doesn't always know what the right hand is saying. With the left hand doesn't always know what the right hand is doing. You hope the hand isn't talking. That's kind of disconcerting.
Well, it may be. There's so much PM 2.5, or there's probably a mutation.
Right. But I should also point out something else, too, is even if we take the government's numbers, even if we accept the government's numbers here, I mean, we're still talking over 40% is being generated locally. So that's, not an inconsiderable amount.
But you don't see that in media coverage, and it's obvious that, like, there's a lot of it's a whole spectrum of media coverage. There's something that's definitely affiliated with the government, and then there are things that are private. But even then, there are connections and then advertisers, and we could talk about that for hours upon hours. But these numbers, even though 57 is not the same as 50 to 70%, it's in a ballpark figure. You don't see that reported. You don't hear that from people when you talk to them. When I spoke to Koreans, almost every single person that I spoke to, and once again, I love Korea, so I'm not trying to kick Korea while it's down, but this is an area where it definitely needs improvement. When I spoke to Koreans on the street, almost all of them were like, oh, that's yellow dust from China. And then when I explained some statistics to them, according to this Greenpeace Harvard study, they were like, oh, wow, I had no idea. But when I spoke to some expats, the way they framed it was they gave me the same answer, except in front of that answer, they said, oh, well, Koreans always tell me that, and then it's from China. So why is there such a big disconnect between even these less horribly looking statistics from the Seoul government or the Korean government versus Greenpeace? It's still kind of the same ballpark. Why is there such a big disconnect from those numbers to what people think and what people hear on the television or in radio?
Well, I mean, I don't really want to speculate on that. I mean, I will say that
you're not in a speculating mood tonight, Rob. Usually, you give me a little bit more here.
Well, I mean, because I don't necessarily want to give an inaccurate.
You've lived here 17 years or longer. You can't make some inferences about what's going on.
Well, one is inclined to say that that there is a fair amount of China blaming in the media. But again, it depends on what media you're listening to.
And it sometimes depends on the topic.
Right.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, not to put too fine a point on it, but a lot is coming. I mean, even the Greenpeace study did acknowledge that at least some of it's coming from China.
30% or more, easily. Right. Sure, yeah.
Right. And we've been, we've all seen the pictures of the Chinese cities, right? So it's easy to make the assumption that it's coming from China, especially since it's getting worse. Um, Obviously, if you're reading, uh, let's say, more progressive leaning media, you're going to get a little bit of a different story. I mean, the Hongure was, I
Yeah,
remember,
I gotta say, when I think in my history of like the headlines that I've seen, I think exclusively they've come from the Hankyoreh.
right. I mean, the Greenpeace, I learned about the Greenpeace study when it came out through the Hongure.
Exactly. Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, yeah, I think there has perhaps been an overemphasis, not just by the media, but also by the government itself, on on the China angle. And I do think the China angle is important. I think I'm not sure what you can do about it, because uh, that's a very very tough situation to deal with in terms of not just cooperation with China, but I mean really what it you're essentially got to tell the Chinese that they need to scale back on power generation, on driving cars and whatnot.
And something else that was in the Diplomat article that I didn't include just because there was such a
Right.
big intro there, but they talk about how a lot of business from South Korea has moved into China.
Right.
And so it almost is like a double cause of itself, where not only is all this yellow dust coming from China, which picks up some of the pollution and brings it to South Korea, but South Korean manufacturing or South Korean pollution that would happen here in the ROK has been moved to China.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, some of that too, but also there's the deforestation issue that's been going on for a while. Yeah, that's why a lot of your dust stand. I mean, the yellow dust, as I pointed out, has been going back, millennia. Yeah, it's been going back centuries, but it's been getting worse because of.
Yeah, it does seem to forget the pollution. It is getting worse, the yellow dust itself.
Well, it's not just getting worse in terms of scale, but it's also picking up like heavy metals and industrial pollution from northern China when it gets dumped over here. So yeah, it's not a good situation. Now, I forget exactly where I read this. I think maybe it was a Korea Herald editorial.
I've been liking the Korea Herald as of late. They seem to have been upping their game.
Yeah. They definitely seem to be. I mean, to be honest, I don't really read either of the Times or the Herald on a daily basis. But when I do read English language press reports, I generally tend to favor the Herald. They definitely seem to be improving. But anyway, there's definitely a school of thought within Korea that before it asks the Chinese to do anything, they really need to clean up their own act. And this probably is where I think you'll probably agree that something needs to be done about thermal power plants. There's a lot of disagreement within the Korean government between ministries on not just thermal power plants, but also diesel cars. And what we have now is basically a clusterfuck of bureaucratic interministry fighting that's just it's not helping.
So, Rob, you've really given me what I was looking for here. You kept saying you didn't want to basically say anything, but you admit that, yeah, there seems to have been a lack of focus on some other causes. I would say 50%, 70% other causes. You would say maybe we don't know exactly, but yeah, you get what I'm saying here. It's like if you're at a Thanksgiving dinner, right, and you have like an uncle who like is an alcoholic, maybe you try to tell the rest of your family members, hey, let's just not have any booze tonight. We already have one guy who's a lush. Let's not overdo it. If all this crap is coming from China, why does South Korea have to be making more coal power plants? That's kind of what makes me angry.
Look, I'm inclined to agree with you here. Yeah, I mean, as you know, Korea has 53 coal burning power plants. 11 of them are more than 30 years old.
And then there's more coming online because I remember even after the Paris climate talks,
right,
South Korea said it was still going forward with the ones that they had scheduled. And I think they left it hanging as to what they would do after that. And I have to admit it's a bad situation to be in. If you've already kind of scheduled these power plants, now you just build them in 2 months. It's kind of hard to get rid of projects that are already down on paper.
Right. Now, this is where the interministry fighting is concerned. Comes in. The environment ministry wants the energy ministry to scale back plans to build more coal-fired stations, and they want them, to close some of the older. But the energy ministry is saying that, well, if we do that, then electrical power rates will start to go up, right? Especially with summer coming on, and people are going to be turning on their air conditioners. So you're gonna see you're gonna see a greater need for electricity, and plus, and this is also another energy ministry bugaboo, it's become more difficult in Korea to build nuclear power plants.
Yeah, of course, because of not just, but because what has happened recently.
Right. So the energy ministry is saying, hey, all the environmentalists told us to shut down our nuke plant or to stop building nuke plants. So, we went over to, coal burning plants, and now you're saying don't do that. So what are we to do here? It's either spend more on electricity, spend a lot more money on alternative energy sources, or build the nuke plants. So which one is it?
And to add to all of that, I think the highest ever since they've been keeping statistics of like 20 to 30-year-old unemployment. As we've mentioned before, the shipbuilding industry is basically going to implode. I mean, it's starting to do that
Right.
now. So not the greatest time to do anything, let alone something that, as you just mentioned, has so many consequences. I get that. It is a bad time.
Also other things too, right? For example, the diesel fuel thing, right? I mean, again, the Ministry of the Environment Ministry wants to see diesel prices increased to cut down demand for diesel vehicles, but the Ministry of Strategy and Finance is like, you do that, then you're going to be screwing industries and households that depend on that fuel. Plus, they're giving out subsidies to lower fuel prices, and that plays into it all. It's not easy, and generally speaking, in terms of clout, I don't think the Environment Ministry is the strongest arm of government here. He's the minister that sits in the corner of the room and keeps his mouth shut. But in his on the bright side, the worse the air quality gets, the more he's going to have a voice to speak with. So we'll see.
Well, okay, so let's talk about that. It just triggered something in my mind. This whole debate of the United States, like, okay, well, if you have Hillary but you're a Bernie fan, you still have to vote for Hillary so that Trump doesn't become president. And then you have I have friends that have told me this. They're like, I think we can withstand 4 years of Trump. It'll get so bad that then we can elect someone like Bernie Sanders instead of someone like Hillary Clinton. Using that analogy here in South Korea, now that the air is bad and it's noticeably bad, is this going to lead to some change, or is this going to allow the media to start reporting this more than they have before and stop blaming China so much?
I hope so. Because this is. The air was okay today. Today was a noticeable improvement over the last couple of days, but I can't see how air quality this bad can continue without there being serious discontent.
Yeah, because even here in Seoul, this mega city that is in Seoul, people are outside all the time. Where I live, they have not the Cheonggyecheon, the big one by City Hall, but they have like a smaller Cheong, little stream that goes through the city, and there are older folks out there exercising. There are people walking their dogs. There's older men drinking makgeolli. It's a good time. And
the air quality, it should be pointed out. I'm not sure if you remember, but it used to be really bad, and then it actually improved significantly over the last decade or so. And now it's getting worse. So I think expectations are considerably higher than they used to be.
Okay, so hard to tell what's going to happen in the future. I guess just final question here.
By the way, speaking of hard to tell what's going to happen in the future, we really haven't discussed the prediction issue. The weather forecast issue, and this is something that really pisses the shit out of me.
Yeah, we can talk about this. Obviously, it's important for you to be able to make generally good predictions so you don't travel across country to do some photos. Is this what you're getting at?
Oh, let me tell you something. Let me just give you some background statistics here. And this is actually, again, one of the reasons why NASA is lending a hand here. Current particulate matter forecasts are accurate only 60% of the time. And the Chosunilbo ran an article, I think today, where they ran their own study on it, and found that out of the last, 18 forecasts, 7 were wrong. And I'm actually surprised it's that high. It's that high because, just to give you an example, one day, it was a couple of weeks ago, I was planning to go down to Bosung to photograph the tea plantations there, and the forecast was that it was going to be really bad Huangsa and really bad dust, and don't go. So I didn't go, and I talked to people down in that region who were out shooting.
It was the greatest day of the last 20 years.
No, actually, not the last 20 years, but it was the best day of the year, a lot of them said. I mean, they said it was absolutely spectacular. I went down the next week when it said it was going to be nice. And indeed, even the day before I went, they were saying it was going to be fine. I went down there, visibility nil. It was horrible.
Now, doesn't this make you a little bit angry like I was before? Maybe we should have opened up with the predictability topic and you could have joined me in my anger. I'm just breathing and it makes me upset. Yeah, this is a serious thing for you.
No, I'm doing 2 magazines and I do a good deal of photography of both. And I mean, even now I'm planning to go down to the later this week down to the islands off the southwest coast of Korea to do some photo work. And I need to have something resembling an accurate weather forecast to do this. And seriously, I mean, I'm almost inclined now to read whatever the National Weather Service is saying and just plan on the opposite.
So why don't you add to the small amount of reporting that we've been seeing from, basically the Hankyoreh, or as I mentioned, some other things that I've seen about this have been, I believe, in the Korea Herald. Why don't you add something? Have you thought about in one of the magazines that you work with, be like, I don't know if you'd call it an opinion piece or something, be like, it's harder to take photos now than it ever was before because of this. Let's do something about pollution. It's not just from China.
Well, I mean, I do travel magazines, so it's not really that's not really the kind of stuff that we do. Although I will tell you a story, and this is true. When I first started working with at my current place of employment with Soul magazine, I remember writing an article that said that there's a lot of yellow dust in spring, and I may have used some apocalyptic imagery to describe it. I may have embellished a bit for effect. So
maybe that's why you're so hesitant to infer things now and make predictions. I guess you learned your lesson, Rob.
No, honestly, the reason why I'm kind of hesitant to infer anything. I mean, this is not the first time I've been somewhat hesitant to state an opinion. Is because I spent over 10 years blogging, stating opinions, and a year passes and you realize what you said was completely ill-informed. So I'm trying to be a little bit more circumspect on what I say.
Trying to clean up your game a little bit. All right, well, fair enough. And you've mentioned that before. I think when you stopped doing your blog, you wrote something that you're like, when I first started, it was just complete nonsense, but in a much less positive way than that. And a lot of
I think it's still up there.
Yeah, a lot of the comments were like, "Oh no, Rob, we enjoyed reading it." Blah 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 blah. Okay, I appreciate what you're doing here, but I'm happy that let's wrap things up on the podcast now. But I'm just happy that we've gotten to a little bit of common ground. We started off, I was full of anger, and you were like, "Whoa there, friend. We don't, with the competing studies, there's only just like one study. This is what the Green government says. This is what Greenpeace says." And I think we've kind of more gotten to a little bit of a middle ground. I'm not as crazy angry as I was, but then we started talking about the fact that this affects your photography, and you got a little bit more angry. And I think this is a nice place for us to meet in the middle.
I think so.
All right, there we are.
All right.
I don't know where I was going with that, but I'm glad that we've been finally able to meet maybe a little bit in the middle or a little bit above the middle, and yeah, just I've never really I'm not sure if I mentioned this on this podcast, but I've never really wore a mask in Korea in earnest, because I just growing up in Iowa in the Midwest, that no one would do that. You have to be like painting something with spray paint to wear a mask,
Right.
but I'm going to do it. I think in the next couple of days, I'm going to go to a pharmacy and get one of those real masks that actually is rated, and get one of the higher level rated ones. I think there's like a 95, 96, up to that, probably like 99%, it blocks up to that percentage of matter that comes in through the mask. I'm going to get a real one, and I think I'm going to have to start wearing it. It's as we've mentioned time and time again on the podcast, noticeably bad. And I don't want to breathe that stuff in. And that's a pretty big jump for me to have to wear a mask.
Right.
Stay safe, everybody. Well, Rob, it was good to talk with you. And it'll hopefully I'll edit this so it'll come up soon. But coming up here, I believe it's June 18th, we have a live podcast with Barry's Seoul Book and Culture Club at the Seoul Global Center in Myeongdong.
Woo-hoo.
So you can come see me, Rob, Colin Marshall, Travis Hull, two other people that I do some podcasts with here on KoreaFM.net. It's going to be a live podcast. You can ask questions. You can, make statements. I think I'm going to bring some Korea FM shirts. I have a handful of those left as well. So, yeah, good times. And, hopefully June 18th at the Seoul Global Cultural Center in Myeongdong. And you can find those details on Facebook. Just type in Meet the Stars of Korea FM. I didn't make the title. I think Barry's doing a great job. I just feel weird giving out that title. Meet the Stars of Korea FM. So, Rob, I'll see you in person on June 18th at that event.
Should be fun.